Hey everyone, this is AT Gonzalez, and I want to tell you about an exciting opportunity that came my way. I recently got into contact with the Game Preserve people. If you don't know who they are, they're a series of retro arcades in the Houston metro area. They provided a lot of arcade and pinball games to the recent Houston Arcade Expos. One of the co-founders, Rusty Key, invited myself, Sam, Saturn, Clover, and Panda to go film at their locations. He also caught wind of the fact that I've been meaning to make a video about Williams Electronics. If you don't know who Williams are, they made a lot of the great video and pinball games in the 80s, and they eventually became Midway's parent company. You see, one of Game Preserve's co-founders, Mr. Ken Graham, he used to work at Williams. He apparently had a lot to say and was ecstatic to talk about it. Keep in mind that Ken was in hospice care when this was recorded, so just be considerate and respectful. I want to thank Rusty and Ken's family for making this possible, my friend Justin for helping me out with research, and the rest of the Software Agents crew for getting the other little clips that help make this video better. With all that out of the way, here's the interview. I'm with Software Agents TV, and here we have Mr. Ken Graham, who has worked in the games industry. And I'd like to know if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. My name is Ken Graham.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize for my appearance, but I'm fighting liver cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to be about 100 pounds heavier. Out online, KLOV, Pinside, a bunch of other places. I'm known as Yellowdog. When I started in the video games industry just after Joust, which was, I think, the third game Williams put out. Well, they put out several mechanical devices. Harry Williams was into pinball. He started the Williams Electronics. And then they had the first video game, I believe, was a Pong emulator. Their big hit was Defender, that allowed them enough money to buy themselves independent again. After that, it was Stargate, followed by Robotron, and then Joust, if I've got the chronology correct. When I went in, that was probably the best job I ever had.
Wow.
Like I said, I went in just after Joust, when they were working on Bubbles and Sinistar and the Joust pinball.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize for my dogs. They're not well behaved.
Yeah, cooks.
You can tell them anything you want, they're going to keep barking. So try to bark louder than them or go around them. I was part of a small group of 4 people that were hired to do the Atari 2600 video games. At the time, I was hired because I was one of the few 2502 programmers they could find. I went in and interviewed, and that was a lot of fun. I was in a 3-piece suit interviewing, and the Noah Falstein, who would have been my manager, came walking in with a lumberjack shirt that was misbuttoned and a coffee cup the size of a bucket. And I didn't realize that was the way you were back then.
Wow.
You know, you kept yourself very well caffeinated, because a lot of times we were working 22 hours a day. to get these games out. It was get it together or burn out. So after a couple of weeks, we hadn't heard anything about what we're supposed to work on. So I went to his boss, Ken Lance, and said, play me or trade me or fire me or do something with me. This sitting and waiting I can't deal with it. So he told me to go down to the art department and see what I can do to help them out. So I went down and rebuilt the art so that you could do things like formal animations on screen. Before that, they had to build the animations and then send them upstairs for the developers to put the animation timings in. Worked on that, got that running. Did a bunch of other cleanups on buggy things. And the animation studio was basically just, I think at that time it was a Robotron. And you just used it as X and Y to go put pixels on the screen. And it was pretty crude, but it worked. They continued using it through Sinistar and Bubbles and Food Fight and several other games. So you could say I had a hand in those other games too. So after I did that, I decided that I was good enough at 6809, which was the processor they were using, to come back upstairs and work on a video game. So I was given over to Kristina Donofrio's team. She was doing a little game called, I think, Monkey Marathon at the time. We're getting pretty far into the prototype, which they needed. I mean, the way games were built was you got 3 months to build a prototype that had a couple of pages, and then another 3 months to build something that you could actually play for a few pages. And then it would go over to the executives and they'd give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. And so we'd gotten she'd gotten the first thumbs up. So she got a team, she got an artwork person, a video person, and me. And we couldn't figure out why we hadn't heard anything from them. And it turned out that our marketing manager had gotten wind that Bally's was making a monkey movie, a monkey game. And so he came into one of our design meetings and said, "Stop the presses, don't do anything. One of our competitors is doing a monkey game. You can't do a monkey game." What? We're almost due for our second 3 months. I'll get you another 3 months. Don't worry about it. Needless to say, we went out and filled our coffee buckets. We tried to console each other that it was going to be all right. Everything was going to be all right. No, it wasn't. It wasn't going to be all right. Noah came in. He'd been assigned to the Sinistar project, and he returned a book to me, which was incredibly fortuitous. The book was A Spell for Chameleon by Piers Anthony. And it was like, everybody's like, well, what's that? Well, Piers Anthony is, the spell books are pretty well known as humorous books about a magic land named Xanth that all kinds of things could happen. And so I tried to explain this book, and they were like, it's all based on magical puns. Well, like what? Like, I don't know, magical roller skates that skate around without you. Everybody in the land has a magical power or two. And so some people can, touch your glass and your glass will freeze. Or, there were a whole bunch of things. I just opened it up at random and started reading some pages. And they were like, that's it. That's our new theme. We're going to do a magic game loosely based on these books. I said, well, if it keeps me employed, I'm all for it. So Mystic Marathon became Mystical Marathon, which was then shortened to Mystic Marathon. And that's the name that it finally got when it was released. It was released as a replacement game. They only made a limited number of them. Mystic Marathon came out, I think, like 100 Defender cabinets, 200 Joust Robotron cabinets, and 100 Sinistar. Trying to think, Moon Patrol sized cabinets. The 5 original boards, I finally tracked down, and 2 of them were destroyed by a warehouse fire. 2 were salvaged, and there's still 1 in existence. It's owned by a collector up in Nebraska who is very protective of it. He won't take it to any shows in case it gets broken. And he won't take pictures of things. So everything else I've scrounged. I've never actually got my hands on a unopened Mystic Marathon update. There were only a few of those left after people started them. And then they disappeared quite quickly. Everybody thought it was a really neat idea. Then they found out it wasn't making any money. So they quickly went through and redid those boards for something else. Redid the cabinets. For some reason, most of them that I've run into have become combat cabinets. I don't know why. But it became kind of a running joke. But by that time, I had already left Williams. They had the AMOA of 1983, and that was where Sinistar and the Joust Pinball were were announced, and they were certifiable hits. Mystic Marathon got a little bit of action, but not much. So based on that, they decided to just stop that. There's no more production of that after the first 500. And they decided they were going to let people go because they weren't sure that, they were going to survive with just 2 hits. Myself and several other people that had been hired got cut in what we called the Great Williams Massacre, the AMOA Massacre of 1983. I tried off and on for years to get back into the video game industry, but I'd already started working in corporate America. And so it was kind of wasn't nearly as much fun, but it was a job. And if I'd known then that this stuff was collectible, man, I'd have been dumping my trunk full of stuff every day. But it was a job. It was just a job. And so never really gave it a thought. But it was a great job because if you want to think about it, these people were geniuses. Mm-hmm. 2 years before, you had 2 little squares banging a 3rd little square around a screen into something as complex as Sinistar and Bubbles and Mystic Marathon, where you had all kinds of stuff going on. So to be able to do that, and the hardware engineers especially, to be able to do that were geniuses. I was always getting yelled at because I was spending time optimizing code. And it was like, but isn't that what you do? No, you just go out and buy faster processors. The last job I had was working as a programmer for United Airlines component called the schedule engine, which takes 770 airlines, lays out their schedule, figuring out how to get from point A to point B, even if it's not the same airline, and then matching up these schedules up against it. Boy, did you have to optimize that. Whew. That was a very, very complicated.
Sounds like it did.
Oh, I loved it. I basically spent 20 years on it. Newer and different variations of it and adding more features to it. But it was not just a job, it was an adventure. Because in addition to all of that, you have to have all the rules. Like you can fly from this country to that country, but you can't fly from this country to that country. Connection times between the 2 countries had to change at certain airports, and at other airports they didn't. So it was extremely complex to get all the rules built in and running. It was a lot of fun. And like I said, that was where we're going and optimizing, and then optimizing again turned into a huge adventure. Mm-hmm. It was just a lot of fun. But it really all came down to that first job at Williams. I never went to school for programming. I was all self-taught.
Oh, wow.
So I had a little programming, Fortran and BASIC. That was it. The rest of it all was self-taught. So when I started in 81, you could still be self-taught. I think it's good to a certain extent, but you know, they tend to teach you a lot that you never use in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, a ton of programming stuff that all that does is add to the overhead. It may make it clearer to the programmers who follow on behind you, but it just makes life clearer is all.
I was curious before you got started at Williams if you knew about their previous work in the amusement industry.
I didn't know a lot about them, but I did some research, and I realized I'd been playing Williams pinballs for ages. And, you know, along with Gottlieb and Stearns, and I think there was a fourth one at that time too, but those are the big three I can remember playing on.
Maybe Bally?
Could be
Bally.
Bally. Yeah, it could be Bally. Yeah, it wasn't until I really got into it as a collector that I started understanding some of the relationships between the companies. All I knew was that people had a tendency to pack up and run across from company to company. And at that time, they wouldn't let you put your signature or anything identifiable into it, because they didn't want anybody poaching people. So the way we got around it was an Easter egg in the high score table. You look in Mystic Marathon and Bubbles and maybe on a couple of others, you'll see KAG, which were my three call signs. And then we put some of the executives' call signs, the ones that helped us out, and so on.
Oh, very cool.
I mean, that was the only way you could sneak your initials into it.
Let me see what else I have here. Someone was curious about so you were the programmer on Mystic Marathon, right?
I was the second programmer.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mystic Marathon was the first game that was designed and mostly programmed by a woman, Kristina Donofrio. I don't think she gets enough credit for it. I always try and give her credit where I can.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, I was curious about her because I was trying to look through her gamography, if there is such a thing. So it looks like she worked on the program for Joust too.
Yeah, she worked on Joust too.
I wasn't able to really find much else. I was curious if you knew any further contributions.
No, that's all I've ever found. I've tried contacting her, but she's never responded to me on Facebook. So I don't know if she got burned by Williams or just doesn't want to deal with it. She's a very nice person. Otherwise, I don't know why, but it may be possible that when they let her go in kind of a nasty, snarky way. I don't know.
I see.
I think we've all been let go that way. She's had more than a couple of jobs.
Let me see what else people were asking me here. So my brother wanted to know. I think it was written somewhere that you had a few, or at some point you had a few arcade games in your collection, and we were curious what you own or currently own, whichever.
Oh, I've got about 50 now.
Oh wow. Okay.
50 or 60. About 9 years ago, actually, I got into collecting about 15 years ago. And my collecting buddy and I kept trying to find some way we could open an arcade without losing our shirts. And an arcade would come in, and 6 months later, it'd be gone. Well, that business model doesn't work. So one of my other friends, Rusty Key, had put an ad into KLOV about a startup doing more or less of a co-op type of thing, where we'd get the collectors to all chip in. We'd get a little clubhouse space and open it up to the public to let the public come in and play our toys. And that evolved into the current business model, which is sort of like the gym model. You know, gyms have these great big machines that you're probably not going to have at home, and they charge you a lease to come play on them. Well, it's the same with these. The big giant machines you're probably not going to have at home, and we charge you a little bit of rent to come in and play on. We called that memberships.
Mm-hmm.
And then we opened up a little place that was in an office warehouse. It was mostly warehouse, and it was really hard to find, especially if you didn't have the gate key. It's a 4-digit code to get in. But all the arcade people knew after a couple of weeks. And so we'd get them all together in the arcade or outside. I mean, if you've ever lived in Houston, you know going inside with very little air conditioning is not a joyful occasion.
No.
Tended to congregate out in the parking lot, and somebody'd bring their grill, or a couple people would bring their grill, and people would bring a cooler full of drinks, and would either grill something, or there was a really nice Chinese place about 5 minutes away.
Oh,
and
cool.
we'd just go out and get Chinese and hang out and talk shop. You know, hey, I got this machine that won't work. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? You know, he's like, well, I was wondering if I could bring it down to you guys. Sure, but only if we can put it out for public play afterwards. Yeah, okay. So that was the start. That was Game Preserve #1.
Mm-hmm.
Every weekend or every other weekend, it was get out your wallets and start doing this to pay the bills. Oh, that was painful. But after that, we got smarter. We figured out what we wanted in a location, and then we went looking for it. And we happened to find it up in the Woodlands. It was it had been converted into a church. It was 2 units side by side that had been converted into a church. So we had a lot more room. And so we could have a lot more games out on the space. And then eventually, that September, I believe, the landlord came by and said, well, you're going to have to be out by the end of the year. Why? We're just starting to break even. Well, because the new landlord wants to demolish this and put up a nice glassy building. And we're like, that's going to lose him a lot of money. This is not glassy building row. So we said, well, can we go month to month until he tears it down? He said he's got all the equipment set to go for January 2nd. And we went, oh yeah, sure. So we found storage for all the games. And it was a good thing we did, because January 2nd, they were already out. They'd already been out the first to take all the glass out of the building.
Oh, wow.
January 2nd, they were tearing the soffits down. I mean, he wasn't kidding. He built his glass building, and I wasn't kidding. I think he's got to be losing his money left over, hand over fist, because he's got like two leasees. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe they pay the lease. Enough of it. Who knows? God knows I'm not a real estate expert. So we found this other place across the freeway. Both of the last two places were in a town called the Woodlands. And so we didn't lose too many members, because we were literally across the freeway and just a smidge down the road. And we were highly visible. And we were in a little shopping mall. And they had taken over 3 units. And we weren't sure we could handle 3 units, so we leased out 2.5, which is fine with the landlords. And everything was going really good. We were actually making a profit after a few months, and we ended up paying back all our bills that had been acquired while we were in storage. And then we started making a little bit of money. And then came the pandemic. We were fortunate in that I'd always been harping on them that we have to have a rainy day fund. So we had some money as a rainy day fund to help us out for a little bit. But it wasn't going to go very far, so the government loans really were what helped us. If we hadn't had the government loans, we'd have gone under without any doubt whatsoever. I mean, at the same time, we opened a second facility down south, just in time to get shut down by the pandemic. I think we were open like 3 or 4 weeks, and then boom, down we went. And for a long time, it was complete shutdown here in Houston. So you have to pick your business model very, very well. And as I've said in a couple of the talks that I've had, yeah, everybody can learn how to repair video games. So that's not an issue. You need a team with a widespread degree of different skill sets. And we were fortunate that one of our members was just a really good business manager. And we had somebody else who was really good on the internet, and we each had our things. And so we were able to survive thanks to that. But if we'd all just been able to fix video games, we definitely would have gone under without any doubt.
Yeah, we myself, my brother, and 2 friends, we went to the spring location on Thursday. Rusty let us have admission for the day, and we filmed there, and we'll be going to the NASA location this Thursday. So we're pretty excited to see it. I had been to the spring location in 2019 before things got bad with the pandemic. But it'll be nice to see the NASA location. I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Oh yeah, it's been developed a lot since then.
Mm-hmm.
We're very fortunate that one of the guys, his best friend is a graphic artist for NASA. So he knows how to get these huge murals printed, like 16-foot tall murals. And so we've got part of the wall wrapped in this huge mural that is just awesome. I mean, you could just go in and stare at that thing for hours. And he's had some other really creative ideas too. Our party rooms are painted like a Miss Pac-Man machine.
I've seen the pictures.
And the DJ booth is shaped like a UFO to keep with the space theme. But the coolest thing is walking down the hallway to get to us. It's a long hallway, but what we've tried to do is sort of put up a history of video games painted on it. So it goes from some of the newer games through Dragon's Lair, through Space Invaders, all the way down to Pong at the very end. So I think you'll find that to be very, very nice, interestingly, aesthetically pleasing. Pictures don't do it justice.
One of my friends, he lives in California, and he's really knowledgeable about repairing arcade machines, and he used to sell pinball machines a few years back as well. He wanted to know if you knew anything about some of the lesser distributed or produced Williams games, such as earlier you mentioned Splat. Splat is a game I only know because it's collected on the Midway collection. Yeah. I've seen one in person ever. So, and it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Yeah,
they're pretty rare. Another one that's really rare is a working Star Rider. It's the one and only disc-based game that Williams made. Those discs are just not stable enough for an arcade where somebody can just come up and slap it and goes, and then they have to reboot the whole thing.
That's what I've heard.
We have one that we're trying to bring back to life in the workshop right now. We
got to see it in person. That was
good.
Yeah, Rusty invited us to the workshop, and we filmed there for about 80 minutes, and that was my first time ever seeing Star Rider. Beyond that, I guess it had this mythical quality to it.
Yeah, it was very rare because it was so fragile. It didn't last in the arcades very long, so it kind of got knocked out of the arcades pretty quickly. I never found one out in the wild until one of our members, Joe Reyna, came hauling one in one day, and it was like, oh my God, you found one. They had stand-ups and sit-downs, and this is a sit-down, which is cool because they made it like a motorcycle, which is what you're basically driving, is a star-powered motorcycle in these races. That was very interesting. I got to work a little bit with Python on that, with the images and stuff. And it was crazy trying to figure out where you were on the track, or just plain where you were on the screen. But anyway, they had these square encoders to tell us what frame it was. The problem is that by the time you got to that frame, it was already displaying 2 or 3 frames ahead. So we had to get the discs all reworked so the video frame numbering was actually ahead of the frame. It was all kind of guesswork. And then eventually they ended up scrapping most of that, and they have it as keyframes. that are down in memory, so they can lock onto the keyframes. But yeah, that was an interesting project. I did some of the power-up self-tests and some of the other things for it. Pretty much we called it the black hole project because it just plain sucked up resources.
Mm-hmm.
There were several others that were not quite as rare. They're built on the Joust 2 frame. Inferno was, I think, the last video game that was done on that frame, that set of boards. And then there was Turkey Shoot.
Turkey.
This was interesting because it actually had real turkey feathers down between the panes of glass, so they could shoot turkey feathers up in between the two pieces of glass. I've never actually found one of those in the wild, but I have got bits and pieces of them. So those were the four that were on basically the Generation 3 motherboard: Joust, Mystic Marathon, Turkey Shoot, and Inferno. So all it takes is a ROM change, and you can pretty much switch between any of them.
System 16, they call it Williams 6809 revision 2. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay.
Revision 0 was essentially Defender.
Mm-hmm.
And then revision 1 was Stargate, Robotron, and Joust. And so version 2 was the Mystic Marathon Joust 2 set. And that was oh my God, I don't know how the engineers did this without losing their brains. It's basically what we did was we were using every little scrap of RAM. You think of a memory map as a vertical mapping of RAM. What they did was they took I think it was a 16K block of RAM, and they replicated it sideways so that you could have additional RAM for images and coding. But that also meant that you had your basic coding stuff had to be replicated across all of them because it had to run whenever any of the ROMs got swapped out. So that I spent a lot of time with the engineers getting that straightened out. That was kind of you didn't have all the right pieces. You'd swap a piece of RAM or ROM out, and then oops, I can't call that function. Let's put them in the ROM. Okay. They have to be in the same location too. So getting all of that straight was always a nightmare. All of that got squared away. It gave us a whole lot more room to play with in terms of code memory. And then that was also where a lot of the sprites that formed the background were stored. They had two video generators that were merged just before they went out. So the one image was the foreground screen. The other image was the background screen. So you could have the background screen scrolling without the foreground screen changing. So that was kind of tricky. But that, I think, was one of the first screens that you could have 32 colors on. So you had 16 colors for the foreground and 16 different colors for the background. And I think it wasn't for another year or two that somebody else figured out how to do 32 colors. The big Mystic Marathon logo for a long time was the largest moving body on a video game.
Wow.
So there were a lot of firsts with Mystic Marathon. But as I said, that was like one of the best jobs I ever had because I was working with geniuses.
One thing about Mystic Marathon is that if you want to play it, you have to find an arcade that has it, and it's an uncommon game, so you have to really go on the hunt for it. I was curious if you knew about, because what I have here on the side, I have some of the Williams and the Midway collections right here.
Yeah.
And the Mystic Marathon has never been recollected, and allegedly
Yeah, it's
there's
never been published
Mhm.
on those game cartridges. I know Doc at Galloping Ghost has one. There's a collector in Nebraska, but he doesn't let very many people play it. He thinks he's sitting on a gold mine. One of these days, the boards are going to go out. He's going to find that he's burned all his bridges for getting it fixed. There's one up in the Northeast that I believe has one. It's not Astro World. I don't remember the name of it. And then we have one down in Houston. And at some point in time, my wife is going to get tired of having the other one around, and it'll go down to the NASA location down south. And if anybody wants to work on the boards, I've got like 6 board sets. I think there's several combinations that actually do work. The arcade community is such a warm and friendly, despite all you hear about the fire wars and pissing contests and all of that. I happened to answer some questions on KLOV that yes, I do collect them, and yes, I was a programmer on it, and sure, my address is blah. The next thing I know, I've got a board set sitting under my doorstep.
Oh, wow.
It's like, I wasn't soliciting for it. He said, no, I'm never going to use it. I thought it'd go to someplace useful. And that one turned out to be one of the prototype board sets, one of the lost prototypes.
Oh, wow.
So that was a very special day. But yeah, I mean, we would regularly get together for fix-it nights, and people all just got together and would work on machines, and everybody was all happy about it. Probably the best story that I have like that is a couple of years ago, there was a big auction. One of the big distributors here in Houston decided he was tired of it. So he got rid of all 3 warehouses. And I'm not talking like the little 10 by 10 sheds. These were 100 by 100 warehouses.
Wow.
They were huge. And so trying to get in and trying to get out was a zoo. And I stepped over to see what one of the guys had bought. And I went, "Oh, so you're the guy who bought the cabinet. I've got the guts. I bought that in the first round. Here's my card." And after that guy was packed up and left, the auctioneer said, "Oh my God, I had my hand on my gun. You wouldn't believe what people will do for $100 ring, much less a $500 video game." And you just pitched in and picked it up like it was nothing. And I said, "Yeah, well, we talked about it. I don't have the machine, I have the guts. So we're going to get together and figure out, who wants it worse." And it's no big deal. I mean, I've got like 20 other machines from this auction. But he was like, "You guys are the craziest people I've ever seen. You just jump in and pitch in on each other." And that's really the way the community is.
Yeah, it's great because what Rusty made clear when we spoke with him is that he takes pride in the fact that the game preserve, that they try to keep the hardware as authentic as possible with very few exceptions here and there. And it's a community effort, and it's a noble effort the way I see it.
Yeah, it's truly a labor of love. I mean, we're not really here to, if you're out to make $1 million, you're going to fail. If you're going to be out to make a living off of it, you're going to fail. If you're out to share your stuff with people and let them enjoy it, you'll be a success. And that's what I alluded to when I went on that rant about the game preserve.
Yeah, I guess we should wrap it up soon. But I appreciate you doing this and telling your side of the story, because it doesn't seem to get covered very much. And I was like, one of the collections I have here, I'm not sure if it's showing up correctly. Every game on it is a Williams game, and I think it's important that we keep that legacy alive. Least we risk it being forgotten to the sands of time.
Well, these things had a life expectancy of about 15 months.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the hardware was going to necessarily go bad, but that's the time frame that most operators gave these games to break even and make them money. And a lot of operators, if they didn't get money made in 5 or 6 weeks, the machine went to their warehouse to be refitted for something else. So the fact that here we are almost 40 years later, still able to enjoy these things, that's what we want to get across to people, is the enjoyment of them, the ability to go up and push a button and start playing. I think all of the games at the Game Preserve are on free play, and the ones that aren't are like old pinball machines that you just have to coin up. But the idea is that, we have a couple of pinball machines that are as old as I am. And that's saying something. In the future, emulation is going to unfortunately be the only thing that keeps them alive. Some really, really good emulators out there. The J-Rock series. They just emulate the hardware, but the CPU is still the CPU. So their Robotron is like right down to the cycle.
Oh, wow.
I helped him work with that. And I helped a little bit with Joust. And those are literally right down to the cycle, because you can tell the emulations. But this one, you can't tell it. The ASIC just simply simulates the hardware. And then they use a real RAM chip or CPU chip to make it work. For the amount of effort they put into emulating the hardware, I don't think they'll ever get paid enough.
Probably not, no.
There's a couple of other ASIC projects out there that are doing basically the same thing. I haven't been able to keep up with all of them.
I think you'd appreciate the fact when we were at the spring location, we were getting some footage of Mystic Marathon. We wanted to capitalize on that because it's a pretty rare game, and I've always struggled to beat at least one level in that game, and my brother, with a little bit of practice, he could get through 3 levels. So that we got that film. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, that's definitely one that you need practice. You need a few hints. When you're on the island of the rolling rocks, stay away from them. Just go up and around them or down and around them. That's obviously one of the puns, is rolling rock beer. Up at the very top, there are always bridges, but you have to be the first one to get there. Only the first one can use the bridge. And there'll be things like a flying raven that will pick you up by the hair and drop you on the next island. There's other things. There's a canoe that will pick you up and to the other island. And then there are jump ahead holes. If you go down a certain hole, it will actually take you to the next island. Or if you jump down a certain hole on the far left side, it'll take you to the far right side. It only takes a couple of those things to get you out ahead of the Bennikins. Oh, that's another limited knowledge of things. The little characters are not elves, they're called Bennikins.
Mm-hmm.
Their son's name was Benny.
Okay.
So it's a great trivia question because nobody ever gets it. Just ask, what are the little elf-like characters on Mystic Marathon called? Nobody ever gets it. Unless they've heard the question before.
I just thought they were trolls or goblins.
No, the troll is a little further in, and then the ogre is a little further in. He'll jump up and down on you. He's one of the worst because you end up getting pounded into the ground longer than just about any of the other obstacles. So you really want to stay away from them. And then the apple throwing trees. I always let one Bennikin go ahead because they focus on the first Bennikin. And they will pound him, and that gives you enough time to get past them without being clunked by an apple. I'm sure there's other things that I don't remember. But yeah, I can usually get to level 5.
Well, I'll make sure to apply those next time I come across it.
Yeah, don't share them at first. Beat the snot out of your brother and then tell him. It's always a lot more fun if you can find those things. But if not, then, just try and use them to your advantage. So I really appreciate the time talking with you. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks. I hope it wasn't too much of a hassle or anything.
Oh no, it's not a hassle.
Yeah.
It's fun. I don't get that many visitors.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, having some time to sit and chat with somebody is a great pleasure. So thank you again for the time and your interest in the early Wings games. It's the only way the word is going to get out about them is by collectors like me putting the machines together and you playing them and discussing them. And that's really what's keeping this hobby alive. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you too.